hitting the pads in an intense training session.
No, I don't like
Vince,
that.
how many rounds could you last with Drake? Do you box?
I don't box, but I ain't worried. I ain't worried about Drake.
Right. Honestly, I'm knocking Drake out.
Whoa!
I'm knocking Drake out.
Really?
Whoa! And I like Drake. He's
Because
dope.
of what
He's
you're
a dope
seeing, or
MC.
just generally
What I'm
watching
seeing.
him on the
I'm not-
sideline?
The stance is a little
Right.
too.
It's a little awkward.
Very awkward. Yeah.
And he's a musician.
Okay. All right.
He's not a musician.
No?
Musicians play instruments.
He's going to be in the
Wow.
Do you like
Don't
his-
do that.
Right.
Do you like
Don't
said
do
he's a
that.
musician.
Don't do
Musicians
that.
play
He's a
instruments.
vocalist.
There's a bunch.
He's a vocalist.
He's
How about
talented.
that?
He's
He's a
talented.
I
great
didn't say he's
singer
not talented.
and rapper.
Singer
Yes, he can sing.
with auto-tune?
No, he can
Auto-tune,
sing.
I
When
can
he
sing.
first came out, you know,
To Americas.
mixtapes.
We heard you sing
We
yesterday.
went through this yesterday with the clone and everything.
Right.
We heard Doug sing yesterday.
I was giving you
should
points.
not
Oh, man,
be
he
playing
followed
that.
you. Like, he's a member of the
Those
tribe.
spades points you lost, they taken away.
To the NBA, despite scoring 30 or more points in 31 straight games, James Harden is still taking heat for the way he's doing it. In an interview, Harden said it's hard not to hear the criticism about his style of play. He also said this streak has been born out of necessity. Take a listen.
The scoring streak is obviously amazing, but it's just something that I had to do because of our situation. We had all the injuries and guys and out of lineups and things like that. So I think the streak just started happening, and then now it's like something to talk about. But it's not something that I'm really honestly focused on. Like, that's something that I have to do in order to give us a chance to win the game.
Vince, do you agree that Harden has had to play this way in order for the Rockets to win?
Yeah, with Chris Paul out and the roster composition changing from last year to this year, yeah, he's had to play this way for them to stay afloat. And I don't think he's had a huge problem with playing this way. I mean, think about who is that gifted and that talented who says, okay, have the ball on every possession, do whatever you want to do, and if you take a long three, fine. If you go to the basket, fine. If you pass it, fine. There's literally like no deterrent from him naturally within the offense. Do I think that other players kind of envy that and say, hey, if I had that level of freedom, I could put up the same numbers? Yeah, I think that's what you're seeing, but he is a unique offensive weapon that's placed in a unique situation. I don't know if they can win a championship or even beyond a playoff round, even if Chris Paul is healthy, because I think Chris Paul is a half step away from being done. But if this is the way that they're going to play, this is the best and most efficient way for them to win. I just don't know it's going to get them beyond one round in the playoffs.
Yeah, look, the most impressive thing about what Harden's been doing is that they were winning. I mean, at one point, they were like 15-6 or 17-6, 21-9 with Chris Paul out. Now that Chris is back, and you're right, he's not what he used to be, but he's still Chris Paul, and he's still a very good player.
Right.
They need to play differently now, and that's why, since he's been back, they're 4-4. Because now you got Chris Paul basically being a role player and kind of a spot-up shooter, and they need to get back to more of what they did last year, where Chris was getting to handle the ball like James and getting to pass and do those things. And James can do different things. We saw it in Oklahoma City. I know he was younger. I know he wasn't a superstar yet, so it was easier to accept the role then. But he came off the bench. He was a facilitator, as you said earlier, when he was in with Westbrook. And he wasn't a ball hog. You know, so he can play differently. But I think he's enjoyed the streak. Who wouldn't? I mean, you know, you're dropping 30 every night. You're shooting whenever you want. But they have to get back to more of a team game with Chris if they want to have any real success in the playoffs.
It's really hard to put that genie back in the bottle, isn't it?
I agree.
Right?
I agree.
Like, oh, hey, wait, now I got to wait. We were, and especially, and actually, the worst part is they were winning, playing that way. This reminds me. It actually reminds me of two things. His streak reminds me of when Allen Iverson led the Sixers to the finals. Remember that?
2001.
Right. Remember he stepped over Ty Lue. Like that team was
MVP,
constructed. Like one of the reasons it was constructed where none of those guys could score. Like Theo Ratliff was his center. None of those guys could. Eric Snow was the point guard. None of them could score. So he almost had to kind of go one-on-one, take some bad shots. I don't think it lasts long term because, among other things, not just the ball dominance and it exhausts you, and then in the playoffs you got to play defense a little bit, which exhausts you even more. more, but also they officiate differently. He doesn't get the calls. He doesn't lead the world in free throw attempts. So now he's playing against better defenders who can get into him more, and it changes how he has to play and lowers his shooting percentage. But it's a hard genie to put back in the bottle, and the greatest parallel I can make is not just Iverson when he had to take a secondary role to Carmelo Anthony, but it's like Carmelo Anthony, who his whole life he has played. He's a mid-range post-up guy and a low-post post-up guy, and occasionally pop out and shoot and play through him. And his attempt at playing with the Rockets this year. Right. Everybody says, oh, hey, I can play without the basketball. When you've played one way your whole life, it's really hard to teach an old dog new tricks. Well, this is not his whole life, but when you played one way and had success with it and gone on this ridiculous streak of 30-point-plus games, and now all of a sudden we get to the playoffs like, no, fellas, now we're going to let everybody touch the ball. Now you're going to play without the basketball. Like, that sounds great, but one, we were winning playing that way, and two, you're trying to rewire a guy on the fly, and that's really hard to do.
I think we put so much emphasis on Chris Paul being out, and that does make a difference, but I think Clint Capella being out has changed the complexion of the offense, because really when you think about it, James and Chris have been starting the game, but many times they get staggered throughout the course of the game until the fourth quarter, so they're not always necessarily on the floor together. I think more of this necessity is because they haven't been able to run the pick and roll with Capella, and he's been such an integral part of this offense throughout the course of the last couple seasons. I think that may change. Kobe had said you can't win championships playing this way. James Harden agreed with him, and we discussed this earlier, Vince. How much do you think it changed when you say you can't put the genie back in the bottle? Do they need to figure out a way to play as they head into the postseason so they're not just playing in this style? Like, can you flip a switch when these guys come back and are healthy and all together for the last month of the season?
Not these guys. Like, I think even the way that they played last year was something similar to this. And you were Harden at optimum efficiency. Chris Paul's always been one of the most efficient point guards. And you saw what happened where they basically plateaued in Game 5 of the Western Conference Finals, where Chris Paul got hurt, and then you could sort of see that series deteriorate from that point on. You saw, Chris, I'm sure you knew it. When I saw Chris Paul go into the lane and grab his hamstring, I said, series over. Didn't matter what happened towards the end of that game or the next game, because they could not sustain that level of play with just one playmaker, and it being James Harden. The other thing, honestly, James Harden has had some weird postseason finishes throughout his career. You want to call it the South Beach flu in the finals in 2012, where he might have been more on South Beach than he was at American Airlines Arena, you know.
And I had given him a pass because he was
young. You gave him a pass for that?
Yeah. Because he was young. I was like, okay, young guy, first time in the
Thunder
finals.
didn't.
The whole right.
Thunder didn't.
Well, but now you've seen it over and over, so it's become a trend with him, not just a young guy.
He's got a number retired at a strip club, man. That's legendary stuff, but that's not the stuff that you want when you want to be an NBA champion.
That hasn't changed, right? That hasn't changed with him.
He's still who he is. He's still going to be who he is. He just had, I think, a 12-turnover game against Golden State. He had the weird game against San Antonio a couple years.
6 points. He shot 10 shots.
And Kawhi didn't
only
play.
10 or 11 shots, right?
That
was game 6.
It was just weird. That's why I think you can't win a championship, because I don't think you can be he can't be dependable later in the series when it's starting to teeter away.
Wait, we're getting away from the fact he doesn't guard anybody. Like, he doesn't guard.
He's better. He's better.
But that's not what. I don't think that is what will stop them from winning a championship. Because let's keep it real. You mentioned Chris Paul getting hurt last year. Maybe they win that series if Chris does. They took him to 7.
Hold on.
Maybe they win that series.
You're right.
And they beat Cleveland.
Yes, definitely.
So maybe they won a championship.
And no one points out Andre Iguodala was also hurt. And Andre Iguodala is that important. I don't dispute.
Not as important as Chris Paul. To the Warriors, he's important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not belittling Andre Iguodala. He's not Chris Paul. And they also have 4 other Hall of Famers on
I understand. Do you remember how that series went when Andre Iguodala was out? Whoever was replacing Andre Iguodala, whether it was, you pick whether it's Quinn Cook or whether it was Jordan Bell, like that's the guy who was guarding the basketball.
He's the mark.
Right? He's the mark, and that's who they went after. So I'm not disputing that they probably win the series if Chris Paul stays healthy. By the way, Chris Paul in the playoffs, where have I heard this before?
Right.
Getting hurt before. But Iguodala being being out was huge for the Warriors. But like, look, the elephant in the room that no one, we haven't brought up today is the reason that NBA guys don't view him as an all-time, like, legendary great, in spite of the fact that he probably should have won the MVP. Yes, because he doesn't guard anybody.
He will go down. No, he will go down.
Russ doesn't guard anybody. They gave him MVP.
Right.
Barkley didn't guard anybody.
In the playoffs, Russell Westbrook will guard people. In the playoffs,
signed Klay Thompson's 12 three-pointers that night.
I understand.
Steph doesn't guard, can't guard.
I don't think that's even.
Yeah, that's not.
No, listen.
What
he
is
a swinging gate defensively. He is 4-on-5 defensively.
You talking about Harden?
Yes.
Steph doesn't guard either.
No.
I know he tries.
He at least tries. That dude doesn't try.
But he doesn't try to guard. Now, it's smart of Steve Kerr to put him on somewhere else. Right. This is the problem. No matter how great you are, we've seen it. We saw it with Wilt Chamberlain. We've seen it with LeBron James. A one-man system cannot win a championship. Not consistently. You know, and that's the problem. That's why LeBron has had to have other superstars with him to win championships, no matter how great he is.
Yeah, everybody's had to have
but one-man teams, no matter how good you're... Wilt Chamberlain won his 2 championships with the lowest scoring averages of his career to those points. There's a reason for that. So that's really the ultimate problem.
Vince,
with Harden.
Thank you for being here.
Hey,
we so appreciate it. And great suits.
Discussion.
Great suit. Good colors. Coming up, the all-time GOAT.
We might have to talk.
Brady.